Hi, we're here with another interview at the UK National Drumfair. Bob, nice to meet you.
Hi.
Can you just introduce yourself and tell me a little bit what you're doing at the moment, please?
In few words. Yeah, I'm Bob Henrit. I've been playing drums all of my life. I began in the 50s in a skiffle group, as or just about everybody did. I graduated from there to Adam Faith. But the question was, what am I now doing with my life? I seem to be more of a writer, although I do, I respond to the telephone and somebody says, do you fancy doing a gig? And I go along. But I'm working on 3 books. Well, actually, it's not quite true. I'm working on 2 books. One of them is called Banging On, which is an autobiography, which, God willing, will be out within 2 or 3 months. So that's finished. I can do no more with that, except write a few more chapters. That's the thing with, the longer they take to put out a book, the more you can put in. There's another one called On the Road Again, which I'll fill you in on a bit in a minute. And the other one is tentatively entitled The More or Less Complete Book of the Arbiter Drum. I was at Arbiter for, I think, 3 or 4 years, all through the AT time. So the book is not just about that, it's about Arbiter. It's about all the drum kits that he brought in, and most people would be unaware that he brought pearl drums into the country. Now this was the first batch of pearl drums, and then of course he did Hayman, and he did Ludwig, he did Trixon before all of those, and eventually he got up to Rogers. And I went to talk to John Heisman, and John said, "How are you getting on with the book?" I said, "Oh, great, thanks, John." He said, "How are you getting on with the Rogers bit of it?" I said, "What Rogers bit?" I'd forgotten that I ever had brought in Rogers. So there was another bloody chapter that I had to write. So I'm doing that. On the Road Again, what gave me the idea, we went to Goa, my wife and I, and we're sitting by the pool, just to set the scene. There's the Indian Ocean over there, no, the Arabian Sea over there, then there's the beach, then there's a herd of elephants, then there's some sacred cows, then there's us sitting by the pool. And a guy, the entertainer, the Turn, came in, set up his gear, and we thought, this could be interesting, just a one-man, on his own. And he went, ring, everybody knows down Ladbroke Grove, which is one-man band, which is a record that I played on with Leo Sayer and Roger Daltrey at Roger's studio in deepest Sussex. And yet here we are looking out over the Arabian Sea, and this guy is singing it. Now, I'm sure Rob would agree, if you think about these things happen to you all the time. You've just got to have your ears open to work out what's going on. So, what I probably haven't said, after Adam Faith, which was a wonderful time, I went to France with a guy called Richard Anthony. Then I was in Unit 4+2. I played on the records without being in the band, and then Argent came along, and we rushed off to America, as everybody did. That went on for 5 years. And then I joined various other bands, but ended up with Don McLean, which was a very interesting gig, because he's a very nice chap, but a very lonely, very nice chap. And I don't think he'd ever had a band before, so we taught him to drink tequila, we taught him to do all of those things. And in return, he would just throw songs in. So there'd be a baying crowd, and he'd go da 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 da, and it would be Baby I Don't Care. But we hadn't discussed it, so it'd be and it was wonderful. And the next thing that came along was the Kinks, and Ray Davies did that as well. Even though we had a list, became known as the Book of Lies, because the list, if you were lucky, the first song was the first song. But it didn't always happen. And he wouldn't tell you. The only way you would know that this was a different song is from the counting. Now, if there's 100 people out there, that's sort of acceptable. It adds a little frisson. But if there's 100,000 people out there and you haven't told the band the first song, that can end up as a train wreck. Well, it never did end up as a train wreck, but we never knew what the next song was going to be, which stopped me. I would have half a pint before I went on, just to settle the nerves, as it were. We couldn't do that in the Kings because, you know, I would have that much off the top of a Heineken bottle to, you know, to get into the gig, because I didn't, you know, we never knew what songs were coming. So you couldn't be drunk. Now, I'm sure the original Kings Mick won't mind me saying that they were often drunk. But by the time I joined, Ray was looking for something completely different. You know, he wanted people who would follow him everywhere. And if Ray wanted to put another middle eight in, he would. If he wanted to play a song you'd never heard before, I mean, he used to write songs on the stage. Right. And which was wonderful. I mean, it really was the most fulfilling thing. And I was in New York, and I had a pal who had a drum shop in New York, which most of the guys here will have known of. It was called Professional Percussion, and the guy's name was Frank Ippolito. And he played in the Army Air Force band, which was the Glenn Miller band. And he told me that what Glenn Miller would do to keep the guys on every night, he would change the intros and the outros of every song. So I made the mistake of telling Ray Davies this, which was a big, big mistake, because then he did it. So, you know, there'd be a different, and when I joined, the very first rehearsal was on one day, and we then went back to do it again the next day, before a 3-month American tour. We did 2 days rehearsal, and I was catching up on 18 years of the Kings, you know, and we did the songs again with different endings. I said, that's a different ending to yesterday, Ray. He said, yeah, we don't always do the same ending. So that was when I realised that it wouldn't be a drunken man's gig, you know, or even, you know, anything to drink. But as the gigs progressed, and through the gig, you know, you've been on stage for a couple of hours, then you think, well, I used to think, oh, probably better have a swig now, you know. But also there wasn't any time to get down and pick up your beer. We were into the next song. So that was the most demanding, rewarding gig I've ever had. And it was great fun. I'm not sure it'll ever come back, but if it does, I guess I'm ready. But we're certainly doing Argent again this year. We did tour last year, and it was 38 years after it was 38 years since we played. Who would have thought? I mean, that's the beauty, and it sort of, I guess it dovetails in with the National Drumfair, or what do we call it, National Drumfair these days? What do we call it? Yeah. It dovetails in that, you know, nothing is ever wasted, you know, and how, you know, old is actually sometimes good rather than bad.
Fantastic. So that would most probably be one of the best things about the National Drumfair for you, I suppose.
Well, what's interesting to me is I think I've owned most of these drums. Like, there was a time when, for my sins, in the old house there were 35 drum kits in the loft. And these were complete drum kits. And there were 55 snare drums, a lot of which I'm seeing out here. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And in the end, I couldn't get up in the loft. There was no, I couldn't get, and I thought, this is really, really selfish. And what I'd done, our generation, to get to the next drum kit, you had to sell the drum kit you already had. There was no hanging on to it. You had to sell it, even if you only got threepence for it. You had to sell it. So I stupidly thought, I'm going to get every drum kit back that I've ever had. So 35 drum kits later, I had all this stuff, and most of it, unfortunately, I'm not sure whether I should say this, was unplayable. Right. Simply, and it was unplayable in the situation I was in. I loved having them, and I had everything, you know, that was delectable, but I couldn't play it because none of the support systems were strong enough to deal with rock and roll. Yeah. You know, I mean, the Ludwig hi-hat, for example, how could anybody play with one of those? Never mind the Trixon hi-hat, which used to wave around. I mean, it was crazy stuff. So I had all this stuff, and I woke up one morning feeling selfish. And I thought nobody could see this stuff. And so I called Lou Dias. I said, Lou, you want to come round and look at all this? And he came round and took most of it away. And there was some absolutely delectable stuff there. But I think, this is sacrilege, and I'm sorry out there in NDF land, but I've decided I actually only need one drum kit. You know.
What's that at the moment then?
It's a Mapex.
Yeah.
At an advanced age, I'm endorsed by Mapex, or I endorse Mapex. I never know which way that goes. But and it's a wonderful drum kit, and I love having it, and I don't have outbuildings full of drums anymore. But I had to hire a guy with a truck. I mean, we're talking about a 4-tonner to move this stuff around, and it's stupid. It's ridiculous. And Dave Mattox told me a story. He used to take 50 snare drums to the studio you know, if he's doing an album, 50 snare drums. Now, any producer worth his salt is going to want to hear them all. So 50 it takes an awfully long time to hear 50 snare drums. So that's what he did, and I, in the end, used to take 5 in, and I had an acrolite, which I knew would do the job, and I knew we would end up with, but not if I started out with it. So I always said, oh, I've actually got an acrolite, I don't know if you fancy this, you know. Oh, that's the one. But whereas if I'd started out with it, we would never have got a gig with it. So there's all this stuff going on, and funnily enough, that was what seduced me into the arbiter system, that you could change a head with the microphone in position. All of these things, I mean, I added up, small-mindedly, how much money I'd spent in getting a drum sound, because getting a drum sound on an album is a day and a half's work. Let's say 2 days' work. So you drive in with all your gear, and you go through all of it, and you end up with a drum sound which is good on its own. You don't know what it's going to sound like with the rest of the band, but you've done that 2 days' work. Now, 2 days' work in the old days was £3,000 worth of studio time. So I multiplied that by the amount of albums I'd done, and it came to the price of, I always thought it was the price you'd pay for a cottage overlooking the sea in Weymouth. And maybe you could even have a little yacht, you know. And this is what we put up with. And it's nonsense. It's absolutely, it's crazy. So I've been there.
Fantastic.
And I don't have the drums, nor do I have the cottage in Weymouth yet.
What's the best thing you've seen here today at the Drumfair?
Well, to tell you the truth, I haven't seen much, because I started with Rob Cook, and then I sort of got slowed down as I went round, and I haven't done the bit over where Eddie is, where Eddie Haynes is. I haven't been to see Jason, I haven't seen any of those guys yet, so I've got to do that before it's too late. What would the best? It's funny, actually, I'll go out on a limb.
Go on.
The Arbiter AT kit, and it's a terrible shame why it never happened. Why would it not happen? But it didn't, and yet I was seduced by it. Yeah. And so was Rob. But it would save money in the studio. But drummers are like, we're no different to anybody else. We listen with our eyes, you know. And it didn't have all the metal work on it. There was talk once of putting a sort of nut box shape on them to make them look like they had nut boxes. And I discovered years later that Jimmy Reno, who also had a drum kit that tuned on a sort of on a single screw, he had these bits of metal on the side to make it look like it had nut boxes on it. So nothing is new. Nothing at all.
Oh, fantastic. Would you be able to give any suggestions for what you'd like to see here in the future at the Drumfair?
I was talking to Gary, actually, and I think perhaps watch the space. But I think I happen to hear what Rob said. It ain't broke. So I'm not sure that it needs fixing. I mean, it is what it is, and it's unique in the UK. So why do you, with respect, why do you want to make it a bit more like a normal drum show? You know, so I think if you're asking the question, what I'd like to see here is more of the same.
Brilliant. And final question: you can invite 4 guests for a dinner party, dead or alive. Who would they be?
Yeah, I heard that one, yeah. Well, I'd like Tony Bean. I always got on well with Tony, and Tony was our producer. And he was the first producer who ever said to me, can you feel that? You know? And no other producer ever said that. Can you feel it? What do you mean feel it? You know, and I could feel it, you know, and he said, you can feel that? Yeah. Anyway, so I got on very well with Tony, and he's in Banging On, my autobiography, of course. But so Tony would be there. this is a tricky one. Buddy Miles. But Tony Meehan was my mentor, if you like. Although we were parallel. I mean, Tony was roughly. I was going to actually interview Tony. And we were at a funeral together, and we had a date set up, and he fell down the stairs and died before I could get to him. And Tony, self-effacing, said, "Who's going to be interested in anything on me?" I said, "Well, I'm going to be for a start, Tony, so let's do it." Anyway, it didn't happen. So Marilyn Monroe, I guess, I would like, but only to ask her the obvious questions. That's only two, isn't it? Oh, gosh. Joe Morello, I think.
Yeah.
I always got on well with Joe. I've been very privileged. I've met all these people. Buddy Miles was a mentor. I really liked Buddy's attack. And so if I said 4,
yes,
I probably will change them all in a minute, that's the problem. But there's lots of people, there's lots of authors that I'd like, Salinger, I'd like to be, but I guess I've said my 4.
One more. Be your waiter for the
wait. Oh, I'd like Anfate to be there. Yeah, that would be good.
Okay.
Yeah, he would be fun. And of course, he's not here anymore.
Fantastic. Well, Bob, thank you ever so much for this
Smashing.
interview.
I hope it's not too much rubbish.
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic. But again, thanks so much for watching. We see you next interview.
Well, watch out for the book.